Welcome everybody to the meeting of the Fire Insurance Review Task Force. It's called to order, and we'll ask Fausto to take attendance as a first agenda item.
Thank you, Director Bassett. So members, if you're here, please state that you are present. Director Bassett,
Present.
Director Torres,
Present.
Aaron Casey,
Present.
Barbara Rice,
Present.
Karen Collins,
Present. Sorry, getting off mute.
Michael Newman,
Present.
Paul Otrogi,
Present.
Anne Chevalier,
Present.
and Roy De La Cruz.
Present.
All right, Director Bassett, you have
All right. Thank you, Fausto, and thank you for all your preliminary work to get this meeting up and running. I'm Chuck Bassett. I'm the chair of this committee. I have less to offer than anybody else on the committee, but I do want to try to, in a desperate attempt for some credibility, I've got some family history with wildfires. My dad and his family used to live in a watchtower in the summers in Arizona. So that's what I've got to offer. Director Torres?
Yeah, hey, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Tom Torres. I'm the Director of the Department of Forestry and Fire Management, and I will be serving as the Vice Chair for this task force. And I'll just start off by saying I'm really excited, number one, about the makeup of the task force, the members that are going to be representing the task force and the perspectives that they bring, the experience they bring is going to be hugely important for the work of the task force as we move forward. So I sort of see this as a logical continuation, a practical continuation of the work we did last year with the Resiliency and Mitigation Council, but with added ability to actually dig into the problems, make recommendations, and try to find solutions for Arizona as we move forward to try to address wildfire in Arizona and the insurance effects that causes. So Director Bassett, I'm super excited to be here and serve as your vice chair, and welcome to the task force members.
Thank you. Aaron, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Kassem. I am the new Deputy State Fire Management Officer, one of three positions that work under John Truitt, who is our state FMO. I have been in charge of the State Fire Prevention Program for the last 6 years, and I'm willing and ready to offer some insight to our communities, and hopefully that will bear fruits of some good products that we provide later on. So happy to be here.
Appreciate that. Randy Chevalier?
Hi, everybody. My name is Randy Chevalier, and Fire Chief for Timber Mesa Fire Medical District up here in the Show Low area. I'm also on this group kind of representing the Arizona Fire Districts Association. I serve as the vice president for that group. I had the great opportunity to serve with several of these members on the Resiliency and Mitigation Council and learned a lot through that process. And I'm thankful for Director Torres for kind of looking towards our direction for some fire service pieces to join this group. Obviously, Northern Arizona, among many other parts of the state, are certainly impacted by a lot of these insurance components. And I think we can bring some value to the conversation, and just super happy to be here. And I look forward to the process.
Thank you, Randy. I've got your last name pronunciation too. Karen Collins.
Karen Collins. I serve as Vice President Property Environmental with the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. We are a national trade representing insurance companies. Some will be familiar with my colleague, Laura Curtis, who did serve last year on the Resilience Mitigation Council while I was able to come in and do a presentation. I'm physically based in Sacramento, California, been in the industry for 20, 25, maybe close to 30 years now. I've lost track, but I support everything property insurance with emphasis on homeowners, and I support every type of natural catastrophe peril, though with a lot of emphasis on wildfire. I'm very, very busy with all of our Western states right now.
Thanks, Karen. Roy De La Cruz.
Hi, I'm Roy De La Cruz. I'm the Chief Underwriting Officer for Commonwealth Casualty Company. We're a small insurance company here based out of Arizona. We write both homeowners and mobile home policies in the state of Arizona, along with a renters program.
Thank you, Roy. Michael.
have the clarity.
Michael, can you hear us?
Would that be me? Sorry. Woke up for a second. Hi, everybody. Michael Newman, General Counsel at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. We're a 501c3 nonprofit research and risk communications institute. We crash test houses. We recreate severe weather and then expose them to wind, rain, and hail, and most relevant for this group, wildfires, so we can better understand how to make our built environment more resilient. It was my pleasure to serve on the Resiliency and Mitigation Council last year, and I'm looking forward to learning from and serving with all of you.
Thank you. Paul Otrogi?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I just want to start off with a thank you to Director Torres for the confidence to bring me in and as an appointee to be part of the task force. Day job, I work for the Flagstaff Fire Department in a role of Wildland Fire Battalion Chief. We're lucky in that we're a municipal fire department with 9 full-time employees that get to focus on wildland fire. So we've been able to begin to implement some of the best strategies, practices, and available science around mitigating some of these insurance issues here locally. And then, like Chief Chevalier, I have a tie to the Arizona Fire Chiefs Association and also represent them in this setting. So happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity and looking forward to the work.
Thank you, Paul. We're happy that you're participating. Barbara Rice?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Barbara Rice. I have been in the building and fire code profession since 1998. I am past president of the Fire Marshals Association, current president of the Building Officials Association. Most of my career, I was a fire marshal. I currently work for a consulting company, and one of my roles is to be the basically our fire line manager for our programs, which means I teach a lot of code, including the WUI code in many states. I'm currently working with the state of Colorado Department of Housing to provide that information and help them align their goals with the newly implemented Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code. And I'm just very happy to be here as part of this task force appointed by Tom Torres, and I can't wait to see where we go with this.
Thank you, Barbara, and we appreciate all of you being here. Thank you in advance for the effort that we're going to put forward in studying this issue and making recommendations. I am going to hand it off to Lori Munn, who's going to facilitate the meeting for us.
Good afternoon. I am Lori Munn. I am the Deputy Director on the insurance side for the department, and I will be facilitating the meeting today. First, I want to start with some meeting logistics. This meeting is being broadcast online and it's being recorded. The recording and associated meeting materials will be posted on the task force webpage. Comments in the chat will not be recorded. For task force members online, please use the hand raise feature to speak. And also, except for the public comment period, only task force members online should unmute themselves and turn on their camera. If public comments are taken, each speaker's time will be limited to provide everyone who wishes to comment the opportunity to do so. We usually limit those to between 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how many comments we have in the queue. To comment, fill out the speaking slip or the Google form if you're online. So with that, we do have a pretty robust agenda. So we're going to move into our first speaker. Zach, if you're on the call, could you introduce yourself and go ahead and begin your presentation? Thank you.
Hi, yes. This is Zachary Howard. I'm an Assistant Attorney General with the Arizona Attorney General's Office. I'll be the Fire Insurance Task Force is main legal liaison from the AG's office. And one of the things I wanted to do now that we have a new task force that's being set up and is kind of do a little overview, a very quick overview of the relevant conflict of interest and open meeting law statutes that we have here in Arizona. Just to give a refresher to everyone here on the board, what what they need to do and what they need to be in compliance with to make sure that they're keeping, that there's no conflicts of interest and that they're keeping the adequate open meeting law standards. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started with my PowerPoint presentation. It's an awesome PowerPoint, very green. And I'm going to start off with a quick disclaimer that the statements in this PowerPoint are from my opinion as Assistant Attorney General. They're not the official position of the Arizona Attorney General's office. With that, I'll go ahead and start with conflicts, conflicts of interest. Going to the next slide, slide 4, conflicts in Arizona. In Arizona, there's a conflict statute that requires that any public officer or employee who has or whose relative has any substantial interest in any contract, sale, purchase, or service to the public agency or decision of the public agency to make that interest known in the official records and to refrain from voting or participating in any manner. And the specific statute for that is ARS 38-503. So getting into what those things mean in that statute, when it says substantial interest, means a non-speculative pecuniary or proprietary interest, either direct or indirect, other than a remote interest. Pecuniary means money. Proprietary means ownership. For purposes of the statute, relative means spouse, child, child's child, parent, grandparent, et cetera, those types of relatives having some sort of interest. Moving on, with respect to remote interest, that is a kind of interest. There's 12 types of them that do not require disclosing or refraining from participating in the decision. In 1978, there was a legislative amendment that added specific language for direct economic interest or detriment to a remote interest, which kind of suggests that the legislature is really mostly focused on economic conflicts of interest when it comes to this statute. All right. And then overall, the main purpose of these conflicts of interest statute is to make sure that is to protect the public from self-dealing by public employees. The mere abstract interest in the general subject or a mere possible contingent interest does not create a conflict of interest. So that's the statutory standard we're dealing with here. So what do you need to do if you have a conflict? So first thing, or most important would be, a serious conflict is recusal. Recusal is mandatory for statutory conflicts of interest or in any situations where there's bias or prejudice. The recused member is disqualified from the matter if there's a conflict of interest, and there can be no discussion, voting, or anything. Task force needs to be cognizant if somebody does recuse themselves, whether a quorum still exists. At the beginning of the meeting, if there is a conflict at the time the agenda item is called, the task force member should ask to be recognized so they can announce that recusal. Aside from situations where there's bias or a statutory conflict of interest, there could be situations that arise where there's no actual bias or prejudice, but there could be the appearance of there would be the need to consider the appearance of fairness, which may, or impropriety that may lead or necessitate maybe the member of the task force to disqualify themselves to avoid that appearance of impropriety. This isn't the case in every situation. There are circumstances that may have an appearance of impropriety where it would not be appropriate to recuse. These would be situations where the member of the task force is acquainted with the licensee, applicant, agency, employees, etc., being a member of a professional association as a licensee, applicant, agency, employee, etc., or serving on committees with the licensee, applicant, agency, employees, etc. So those are situations where even if those relationships exist, don't necessarily need to recuse yourself. Another thing you can do if there's a conflict of interest is abstain. To abstain means for the board member or task force member to decline to vote. In the absence, however, I would say in the absence of a real reason to recuse oneself or a genuine appearance of impropriety, task force members do have a duty to make sure that they decide on matters that come before them, shouldn't be abstaining merely because an issue is controversial or difficult to decide. With all things, as obviously a public officer, an employee, you cannot use your official position to obtain anything valuable or a benefit that would not ordinarily accrue or arise to the officer or employee in the performance of their normal duties. If such that is of a character as to manifest a substantial and improper influence with respect to how they perform those duties. Finally, near the end on conflicts, disclosure, and I believe most of the members or all the members of the task force have done their disclosures, but public officers, employees must disclose any conflict of interest in the public agency's official records. This can be either through a signed disclosure or through the official minutes. Disclosures, including disclosure forms and meeting minutes, must be maintained for public inspection. And then some of the penalties, if, obviously if there's conflicts of interest that are made known or violated, penalties for violating conflicts of interest could include criminal prosecution and forfeiture of public office or employment. An intentional or knowing violation of the conflict of interest statute could be a Class 6 felony. Reckless or negligent violation is a Class 1 misdemeanor. So ultimately, in dealing with conflicts, the best practices are, require all public officers and employees to complete new disclosure forms every year just to make sure nothing new keeps popping up. Store all disclosures separately, establish a process to review and remediate disclosed conflicts, and obviously, as we're doing right now, we'll probably do in the future if we have to, more periodic conflict of interest requirements, processes, etc. I'm going to go ahead and move into open meeting now. So open meeting law, under Arizona open meeting law, all meetings of any public body shall be public, and all person so desiring shall be permitted to attend and listen to the deliberations and proceedings. The specific statutory requirements that outline open meeting law are shown in Arizona Revised Statute 38-431 through 30-431.09. It's important to remember that all legal action that is transacted during an open meeting will be null and void if there's a violation of open meeting law. So kind of dissecting that a little bit, in terms of public bodies are the entities that are subject to open meeting law. These are all boards and commissions of the state. And these include subcommittees, standing committees, special committees, advisory committees, et cetera. Any kind of special board or anything like that is going to be subject to open meeting law. So what happens? So what would a meeting be that would necessitate open meeting law? A meeting is any gathering in person or through technological devices of a quorum of a public body. And this is a meeting which there's discussion, proposal, deliberations, and probably most importantly, any action that leads to a specific legal action taken by the board or entity. For a meeting to happen, like I said, there had to be a quorum. A quorum is basically a majority of the specific board, unless there's a specific statutory provision that says it needs to be more than just a simple majority. With respect to meetings, as I mentioned before, these can be in person or online electronically. A one-way communication, electronic communication by one member of a public body that is sent to a quorum of the members is an open meeting, and would be subject to open meeting law. An exchange or electronic communication among a quorum of the members of a public body that involves a discussion, deliberation, or taking of any legal action on a particular item is also an open meeting. Even if it's electronically, even if it's email, anything like that, it would be still considered an open meeting. For purposes of open meeting, the main thing we got to be wary of, or when we're deciding whether an open meeting is happening, is whether legal action is occurring. Legal action means a collective decision, commitment, or promise made by a public body pursuant to the Constitution, the public body's charter, bylaws, et cetera, et cetera. Discussions and deliberations or consultations involving a majority of the members that regard matters that could foreseeably ultimately have a final action taken on it. That is considered legal action. Even if any discussions, anything that would ultimately lead to any kind of final action, it would be subject to open meeting requirements if a quorum is present in that discussion. So basically, safest course of action whenever you're having this type of discussions like that with any other board members is just to assume open meeting law applies if you have a majority of the body that you're talking about issues that are relevant to the board. All right, and some pitfall examples of situations where maybe people thought that open meeting law didn't apply and it ultimately did. emails between less than a quorum that are ultimately forwarded to the quorum of board members, showing deliberations, emails between less than a quorum that are then communicated to enough members that they're aware of the content of what the communications were, emails proposing motions for taking of legal action, obviously, as we discussed. And then also, if there's discussion before a meeting or after a meeting between board members where a quorum is present, those can also still be considered subject to open meeting laws. So that's not to say that every single email communication is going to be subject to open meeting law. There are allowable emails that board members can do with each other that wouldn't be subject to open meeting requirements. This includes the proposal of an agenda item without stating your opinion on the item, passing along information. If you want to just share information without an opinion, just saying, hey, this is going to be coming up on the meeting. I'm not saying anything about it, but just for your reference. The best practice is to include in any email to ensure compliance with open meeting law. The recipients of this message should not forward it to other members of the board. Members of the board may reply to this message, but they should not send a copy of their reply to other members. Like I said, this is more about dealing with the serial communications. Want to make sure that if there are discussions happening between members, it doesn't get sent to a majority of, or a quorum of the members such that it would be subject to open meeting law. And then always remember, email communications of the task force members related to their official duties are public records, and they have to be for public inspection or reproduction. Staff emails can also theoretically be subject to open meeting law. Staff may send emails to board members, and passive receipts of information from staff without more does not violate open meeting law. However, if there's a situation where staff does send opinion or substantive communications about board business, it could be subject if it's exposed to a quorum of the body. All right. An exception to open meeting law. It isn't a violation to express an opinion or discuss an issue with the public or the public personally, or the media personally, or other form of public broadcast, if the opinion or discussion is not specifically directed or given to another member of the board or membership, or there's no concerted plan to engage in collective deliberation to take legal action based on that discussion. A few other quick important tidbits about public meetings, specifically notice. Notice meetings are required, and they're required at no later than 24 hours before the meeting. These notices have to provide the place or location where the meeting will be held, instructions on how the public will have access to that, and most importantly, the agenda, or what will be discussed in that particular meeting. For the agendas for public meetings shall list the specific matters to be discussed, considered, or decided. Agendas must contain information reasonably necessary to inform the public of what's going to be talked about at the meeting. The chair can take items out of order if they wish, but it has to be talked about or referenced in the notice. If there's a timed item, you have to hear that item at that specifically scheduled time. And probably the most important thing I want to highlight here is if there is a particular topic or subject that's not on the agenda that the board wants to discuss, the board can't discuss it. There has to be adequate notice on an item if the board wants to discuss it. It can't be at the last second added or discussed by the board or the task force unless there's that notice given. So if it's not on the agenda, you can't talk about it. All right. Executive sessions. This is kind of a small exception to the public meeting requirement. Possibility of executive session must be included in the initial notice and the agenda. The specific reason for the executive session must also be listed. So executive sessions, among one of the many, but the most important or usual reason is the discussion or consultation for legal advice with the attorney or attorneys of the public body. So in a particular situation, if there's something that comes up that the board wishes to get legal advice on, there's a vote by the board. A majority of the members need to agree to it to go into executive session. That whole discussion is then completely off the books. It's private, confidential. Members of the public can't attend, and then there's no separate meetings or separate minutes are kept. and there's no voting or decision-making. It's purely for discussion purposes. Those who can attend the executive session include board members, key staff members. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. Staff person to take minutes, auditor general, and obviously the board's legal counsel. Pitfalls with executive sessions you got to be wary or watch out for. If the board's attorney is not present at the meeting, the board cannot go into executive session. The attorney needs to be present. Also, board members, there has to be a discussion about the underlying item that the board wants to go over in the actual regular minutes of the meeting. There's some kind of acknowledgement of what particular item the board wants to discuss before it goes into executive session. As I said before, there's going to be no voting or actual decisions made during executive session. Those have to come out in public. And it's also important not to reveal any attorney legal advice or any other confidential information from the executive session. For example, you can't say after you get out of executive session, well, because our attorney said this, we're going to go ahead and make this decision. Can't do that. All right. Calls to the public. So obviously, all meetings are available to the public, and all desiring shall be permitted to attend and listen to the meetings. The public's particular rights with respect to being able to these meetings is they can attend them, they can listen to deliberations, they can record the meetings if they want, they can expect, any citizen with a disability can expect compliance with the Disabilities Act. They don't have an absolute right to speak. Also, the public are permitted but not required. If they are going to be included, they have to be listed as an agenda item. And the speaker's time can be limited, and they do have to state their name for records keeping purposes. We'll also say that while the public can address any issue in the call to the public, it's important to remember, as I said before with the agenda, the board cannot necessarily address an item that is raised by the public unless it was contemplated in the agenda. Can't talk about anything that wasn't discussed as an agenda item. So if there is a situation where someone from the public wants to discuss something that's not in the agenda, the correct response is either to direct staff to study the matter, ask that the matter be placed on a future agenda, etc. And then finally, if failure to comply with open meeting law, there's some penalties, specifically under revised statute 38-431.07, can include a civil penalty up to $2,500 for each violation, up to $2,500 for subsequent violations, equitable relief, attorney fees, intent to deprive the public of information is found. The court may remove a public officer from office. Probably most importantly, I guess, for this body to consider is nullification of any legal action taken at the meeting. There's legal action taken and there's not compliance with open meeting law, that action can be nullified. And then sanctions may be imposed upon any person who knowingly agrees to aid or attempts to aid another person in violating this article. All right, I got some resources here as well. I got the agency handbook and the specific open meeting law statutes here. You should have access to all this stuff. If you have any questions, you feel free to reach out to me. Now I'm going to stop boring you now.
Thank you, Zach. So Zach will be attending our meetings just to let the task force members know to help keep us in line so you don't have to remember every little detail that was in those slides. Also, talking about conflict of interest, you all should have gotten an email that had the form for you to sign, and that needs to be returned to us, as well as some training that's required. So if you have any questions on that, you can reach out to Director Bassett or myself. Also, is there any questions for Zach from members in the room?
I have a question.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, so Zach, I appreciate the presentation, and so my question is related to the purpose of the task force. You know, the task force is chartered to make recommendations, and so my question revolves around how we share information between members. As I read as I understand your presentation, we can't share information between board members or task force members?
But you can share you can share information, but you can't deliberate on it.
Okay,
Can't, if there's information that, the task force finds or discovers and they want to share with other task force members, that's fine. But the actual deliberations about like, okay, what do we want to do now that we know this information? That stuff can't take place unless it's at a public meeting.
thank you. And then another follow-up question to that is this task force has the ability to establish work groups? Are work groups, do they have to comply with the open meeting rules as you described, or are they a little bit different?
I mean, it depends on, I guess I would say the size of the work groups. If there's a quorum present of the task force in the work group, then I would say that so meaning the majority of the task force is on a work group, then it would probably have to comply with open meeting law.
Thank you.
Any other questions in the room? Any questions online? If you have one, please raise your hand. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you, Zach. So next, we're going to just go over the task force duties. As you all know, legislation passed House Bill 2054 and 25, and that directed DIFI to conduct data calls on Arizona homeowners insurance market for calendar years 2025 and 2026. It also established the task force to review the data collected and the Arizona homeowners insurance market data call. So DIFI will actually collect and review the data, identify possible current and historic trends in homeowners coverage availability, insurance rates, non-renewals, and cancellations, and review data related to fire risk mitigation science and make recommendations related to building codes, principal space requirements, and ordinances that reduce the risk of wildfire. So those are the tasks that were established and that this group will be looking at over the next 2 years. Any questions regarding the task force duties that have been presented so far before we move on? Any questions in the room, online? Okay. So next, the task force may establish work groups, as Director Torres pointed out, that can assist the task force in carrying out its duties. They can consult with experts in the field on wildfire risk and the impact of wildfires and wildfire risk on homeowner insurance premiums. And then by the end of each year, the task force must submit a report of its findings and recommendations to the governor and the legislature. So those are the main tasks that are and the duties that are presented to this group and that we will be working on over the next 2 years. Any questions? Any questions in the room? Any questions online? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move into our next presentation. That is going to talk a little bit about the data call and just a little bit about DIFI and what we do with rates. Tom, if you'll introduce yourself and then go into your presentation. Thank you.
My name is Tom Zupin. I'm the data analytics manager here at DIFI. I've been with the department a little over 10 years. Previously, I was the property and casualty rate rule and form filing supervisor. So I oversaw all the filings that came in for rates and rules and forms or policies that are associated with most of the insurance sold in Arizona, specifically also homeowners insurance. So I just wanted to give you a brief overview on that activity of what we did. So Arizona, as it relates to rates, is a use and file. Some states are prior approval. Other states are file and use, where the insurer would file, would have to, could then use. But with Arizona, an insurer can start using their rates or their changes to their rates at least 30 days prior to submitting it to us for review. Okay. We do not approve that. We acknowledge that those rates are in accordance with the statute. They can't be excessive, inadequate, or discriminatory. One of the things on the homeowners, most of the homeowners policies in the country, specifically in Arizona, are based on the New York Standard Fire Policy. This is a 1943 policy that typically describes coverage for fire. Now, homeowners policy has other coverages included in it, but the New York Standard Fire Policy is the basis for it. And typically, most homeowners exclude earthquake and flood, but if an earthquake were to cause a fire, the fire would have to be covered. So it only excludes damage due to earth movement. But if it did break the gas line and that started a fire, that would be covered. One of the issues that we've seen, at least in my tenure, is that there are a lot more predictive models being utilized. And so these models take all sorts of different characteristics of the home or the insured and use them to determine the risk associated with that home or with that insured. And these can be hundreds of characteristics. And so they're combining these to determine a rating differential in terms of, who is a better risk and who is a worse risk. So that is one of the things we've seen, proliferate here. And included in that is some of the wildfire risk scores that are out there being utilized by insurers. But just so that you know that there are some actuarial standards that do govern the review of those models. So those have been developed over the years to address that. One of the other types of models are CAT models. We typically have never seen those in Arizona because we do not have hurricanes. We don't have a predominance of earthquakes. But these types of catastrophic models are coming into play because we are starting to see the wildfire risk, and we also see the severe convective storm as well as flood. And so those are starting to come in. Typically, those types of models were used by the reinsurers, the ones that provide insurance to the insurers, but they're starting to be used more predominantly by other insurers just in terms of underwriting or deciding where they would want to write a risk in Arizona. So next. So with that, this is from Verisk. This is about 30% of insurers that write in Arizona. So they have members that provide them statistical data. This level of statistical data we do not collect, but they do collect it from their members. And what you'll see here is that the predominant losses in Arizona in 2023, this is 2023 data, is water damage. Okay, so predominantly broken water lines, lines that go to your refrigerator or to your dishwasher or to your washing machine, that damage is dominant losses in Arizona. Wildfire or any type of fire risk is, as you can see, is down about in the third category. So we are lucky here that we haven't had those types of losses. If you looked at California, they're probably number one, but we haven't. But we do have the wildfire risk in Arizona, so there's a high potential that we could have these types of large losses. Any questions on this? So again, the earned premiums up there are only about 30% of the total earned premiums in Arizona, but they do. The loss ratios and everything do coincide to about 30% across the board. They reflect uniformly what we see in Arizona. Okay. So the data that we do collect shows that we have about 149 active insurers in Arizona writing homeowners insurance. And they're writing about $3.38 billion in coverage. That's direct written premium. That number, though, does include renters insurance. So it in addition to mobile home, condo, and homeowners, as Roy said, they write homeowners and mobile home. There are others that just write tenant. So this is a larger number and these are the numbers that get reported to us in an aggregated manner. And so most data calls could break this down into greater detail. The surplus lines market provided this information for 2024, that there were 51 surplus lines insurers, and that includes the Lloyd syndicates that write about $17.9 million with homeowners insurance. And typically surplus lines is for somebody who cannot get a homeowner's policy from a smaller admitted carrier. They might have higher risk, they might have a high value home. They might be somebody who's a professional athlete that has some liability issues associated with, them having potential, where a liability claim could be filed against their homeowner's policy, things like that. So surplus lines does write in our as part of the data call, we are considering collecting the information on farm policies because a lot of rural areas do have farm policies. The ranch is a small areas out there may be written under a farm policy. There are 31 insurers that write about $24 million worth of farm. And then there's also some that write fire dwelling. There's a large number in the premium here, though, reflects some commercial coverage. But if there is an individual that has maybe 1, 2, or 3 homes and rents out 2 of the homes, they may be buying a dwelling property type coverage. And so we want to capture that in addition to the owner occupied homes. Any questions on that? Next. So with all that, we developed some data call elements. Those are posted to the website. You can go there. Basically, this is a categorization of the type of information that we're asking for. So basically for the company information, there's about 9 fields that would be completed. Those would also be answered to determine whether or not they actually are writing homeowner policies in Arizona, whether it be the farm, the condo, both home, or the owner occupied. Per the statute, it was requesting information on in-force policies. And so there's about 36 data elements related to in-force policies, those that are currently in force during that year, 2025 or 2026. And it's illustrated, you could have a policy that started in 2024 and continues into 2025. So that would also be captured, as well as any policy that just resides in 2025 or any policy that started in 2025 that may go into 2026. In addition, we are also asked to look at non-renewed and canceled policy information. So there's 13 data elements associated with that. Whether or not it was non-renewed for condition of property or for fire risk. And then in order to be able to compare the two, contrast the two, we needed to be able to look at aggregated wildfire risk areas against the aggregated non-wildfire risk areas. So since we're looking at the premiums charged, the deductibles, and the risk ratings for those homes within the wildfire areas, we need to be able to compare that against non-wildfire areas to see what the differential is. Are you paying more premium in wildfire areas than you are in non-wildfire areas? And how much would that be? And so the only way to be able to do that is to get the aggregated data in that respect. But we are accepting comments on the data call elements. There's an email address at dataanalytics@difi.az.gov where anybody can submit questions regarding the data elements. Once we have those finalized, then it will be put into templates, Excel templates that could be populated and submitted to the department for compilation. Questions?
Are there any questions for Tom in the room? Any questions online from any of the members? As Tom said, this information is all out on the website, so you can go and review that information. And if you have questions, get back or to Tom or to the email that he just cited, and that's also published. Great, thank you, Tom. Next, we're going to move into a presentation on heightened fire risk areas in Arizona. I believe Director Torres, and we have Wolfgang on the phone or on the screen. So who's kicking this
Yeah,
off?
I will kick it off.
Okay, if you can introduce
Wolfgang?
yourselves.
Wolfgang, can you hear us?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so with me today is Wolfgang Grunberg. Wolfgang is our forestry GIS program manager, and he's going to help explain council about the nuts and bolts and the details of our analysis. But I'm going to kick it off. Fausto, if you go to the next slide, please. And so what we're going to talk about are the statutory requirements, just so everybody's clear, the purpose of what heightened fire risk means to this council. And then we'll talk about the approach, the high level approach, and then Wolfgang is going to share details on our analysis and the results. And then I'll summarize what that actually means to the folks on the council. So first of all, the statutory requirements. So as required, the state forester, which is me, is required to define areas of, quote, heightened fire risk in order to inform the areas for the data call that Mr. Zupan just talked about. Just a couple of things to note about heightened fire risk. There is no generally agreed standard on what that means. And so, but in general, it means that it's an area identified to inform the insurance data collection and analysis by the team. It might be more important to talk about what heightened fire risk is not. Number one, it's not a determination of risk for an individual home or parcel. It's not a zoning or land use designation, and it's not a new regulatory or enforcement boundary. And it's also not areas that I'm aware that insurance companies make policy level decisions on. It's simply the area that is going to be used to inform the data call that Mr. Zupan talked to earlier. And so I just wanted to make a point about risk. What really does risk mean? You know, there's a lot of different, if you sort of Google risk, you'll get a lot of different definitions, but for our purposes, in defining heightened risk areas in the state of Arizona, it means hazard times vulnerability. And hazards can be considered the likelihood of a fire, the intensity of a fire, and vulnerability can be considered the exposure and susceptibility. And these sort of components are baked into different risk models that I'm going to talk about, and Wolfgang is going to provide additional detail as well. Next, Fausto. And so just a couple of notes about our approach to defining areas of heightened fire risk. Number one, we wanted it to be science-based. Two, we wanted it to be transparent. So everybody that's engaged in this conversation knows where the data is coming from and what our assumptions are. Number three, we wanted the information to be publicly available. There are a lot of models, risk models out there that are proprietary, and there are some that are not as publicly available as others. And so there's a wide spectrum of risk models, and we thought it was important to make the information that we're talking about available to the public. And obviously, number four, it needs to be spatially based, because at the end of the day, what we want is a map in order to define the data call areas. And so what we settled on was a risk model managed and developed and maintained by the U.S. Forest Service, and it's called wildfirerisk.org. And this risk model has been in place since, it was mandated by Congress back in 2018, and it's been maintained ever since. And so this is the foundation for our determination of heightened fire risk in the state of Arizona. The state of Arizona is a big state, almost 72 million acres. And so you will probably not be surprised when we get done at the end of this, when we say that the areas under heightened fire risk are a pretty big number in terms of acres or square miles. The last thing I'll mention on this slide is anybody can explore wildfire risk to their communities, including to homes, at the website that I list there on the bottom, wildfirerisk.org. And so with that, Wolfgang, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about how we utilize this data and came up with the heightened fire risk areas for Arizona. So Fausto?
Sure. My name is Wolfgang Grunberg. I've been now with Department of Forestry and Fire Management since about.
Hey, Wolfgang, I can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
No.
Can you hear me?
Online, I can hear.
Yes, I can hear online as well.
Wolfgang, we still can't hear you. We can barely hear you, like a whisper.
I'm audible online.
I am online and I can hear Wolfgang.
I
at
can
normal.
hear you too. It's fine. It's all good.
It sounds like they can hear them online.
Yeah, the speaker turned down.
Hopefully, yeah.
All right. Can you hear me now?
That's better, Wolfgang. Thank you.
Okay. Sounds good. Wolfgang Grunberg with DFFM since about 2013. I had many roles, and as our agency grew and in size and responsibility, so I tried to keep up with the agency as well. In this case, I'm going to discuss just how did we select the housing risk data. And again, just to reiterate, we just searched for something this is essentially a rapid assessment. So we were working on trying to get this done fast by searching defensible and already adopted and recent wildfire housing risk models that were out there. And wildfirerisk.org's housing unit risk data set, or WHO risk, was really outstanding for us. This is based on Forest Service research from 2024. Most of the data is from 2020. And so we downloaded the data from the Forest Service research site and started looking at it. So now how did we actually define the areas that we want to report to? What is to define this wildfire data call area? We really need to figure out first, well, what is the spatial unit? And to do that, we recommended using hexagons to generalize the underlying information. Just so you know, the WHO risk data sets is 30-meter resolution raster data sets, not really conducive for most spatial analysis, especially for insurance companies who might not even have dedicated GIS staff. So we creating polygons, hexagons in this case. Hexagons are pretty standard to try to avoid any confusion with existing parcel boundaries or administrative boundaries. Just to show this is a generalized area. And the size was really determined by trying out various sizes. The important aspect was to balance not too big and not too small. And a 1/4 square mile size hexagon was the end point. So we want to make sure we catch enough of the communities at risk, but not overestimate. And this is an expert-based balance. So that's how we determine the spatial unit, the analysis unit. Then we looked at the housing unit risk data set. It has a risk score between 0 and over 2 million. That's how it comes from the Forest Service. And so we determined what is a good cutoff value for essentially the pixels that we consider to be of interest. And the cutoff we determined through trial and error was about equal or bigger to 10,000 as a value. This choice was based on a balance between including vulnerable areas, especially wildland-urban interface areas and communities, with over-inclusion of structures inside of our arid lands core, especially Phoenix Valley, Tucson, Yuma. We didn't want to include all these areas that obviously probably don't have much wildfire risk at all, but want to make sure that other places such Flagstaff, Prescott, Payson, and the foothills in the valley, as well as in the Tucson areas, that those are included. And then finally, after we came up with all these hexagons, identified them, we summarized those wildfire data call area hexagons by looking at by county, by WUI categories, and also use some modeled building footprint data to get a rough estimate on structure count. Next slide, please. All right, so these are the products we that have been delivered. First is a PDF, which essentially summarizes things much better than I did in this presentation, showing the data source, the methodology, showing preview maps, various tables, and a lot of other data and metadata. The next product is Polygon Layer, the 2026 Vitka Polygon Layer. This is actually the hexagons that are considered to be part of the wildfire data call area. It covers about 3,000 square miles and almost 2 million acres in Arizona. So that's the area of interest. And then we also are sharing a statewide index layer. It's just a hexagon statewide, no attribution, nothing, with a unique ID for each hexagon that allows for insurance data to be collated and especially referenced inside of not just the Vitka area, but also outside. So that was actually a request by DiFi. So the reason we have all these hexagons in first place is that we have uniform spatial units, all have the same area, and that allows comparison between apples and oranges and outside and inside of the area of interest. All this kind of spatial analysis is much, much easier if we have the same area in each analysis unit. All right, next slide, please. So this is the map of Arizona. Here we can see all the red dots represents roughly a hexagon or a clump of hexagons. These are the resulting areas of interest, the data call areas. Next slide, please. Here we're looking at the Phoenix Valley. It shows you that there are some hexagon in the interior. There's, of course, a lot of hexagon around the foothills and in the woody areas around the valley. There is probably an over-inclusion error here, especially because the underlying Forest Service data wasn't that great at differentiating, let's say, a golf course from that's probably low wildfire risk for another green space that would be higher wildfire risk. So what I'm trying to say is that this data, the underlying risk model was developed nationwide, and it's not specific to Arizona. So this is not unusual that we find some limitations to it in Arizona or specific ecosystems and climate areas. Next slide, please. So this is now looking at Tucson. You can see, again, a lot of inclusion of the foothills as well as wild and urban areas on the east side of town, which is a bit more rural. And next slide, please. So this is Flagstaff now, and we want to make sure that the areas that we know and our experts know are at wildfire risk, that we make sure we try to be as inclusive as possible. But in the end, this analysis is not going to catch all the areas. There will be interface areas outside of the insurance data call area that are not captured. This is just a sampling method. It's not a full analysis of the entire population of structures and the risks. You can see that there are only a few areas in Flagstaff that are not included, and those are more the industrialized areas, to the best of my knowledge. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So this is Prescott, a larger Prescott area, and we had to make sure that especially all these in-holdings in Forest Service lands are included, like Potato Patch, Walker, and Highland Park. Those are those are well-known high-risk areas. And so this looks pretty promising, but again, this is a rapid assessment based on a sampling approach. Next. All right, so this is a summary of the acres per county, as well as a rough estimate of structures. This count of structures those are modeled footprints developed by Microsoft in 2020. Those are not actual buildings or insurers, or insurees, I guess. These are just perceived structures by this modeling effort, but it gives us a general idea on overall how much data might be coming back from this data call. There's no way for me to accurately differentiate between a residential or a commercial building. That data is not available to me. And the next slide, same thing with summarizing the wildfire insurance data call area, in this case by wildland urban interface classes, high density WUI, medium density WUI, and low density WUI. And it just, based on this analysis and the available WUI classification data that we have, again, those are all not absolute, those are just modeled areas, we have very good coverage. So essentially, the wildfire insurance data call areas coincide very well with identified WUIs. Now, this WUI data we're looking at was developed by Silvis, it's a forestry research institute, and they have been modeling and tracking and mapping WUI for a decade at least. And the most reliable WUI data I have for Arizona. Maybe there's better data, maybe there's a better approach for this analysis, but this is a simple, repeatable analysis using public-facing data sets. Anybody can repeat what we did here. And if I'm looking forward to making better models in the future, but this is how I start. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And okay, are there any questions?
One more slide.
Yeah, please.
So this is just a summary. So Wolfgang, thank you so much. And so as you can see, estimating risk is sort of complicated. And so just a summary, every county in the state of Arizona has some sort of heightened fire risk. It's largely matches the WUI areas. I will tell you that we track WUI in Arizona as well over the past 30 years. Over the past.
This room has a mic.
Yeah, just give it a second. That's probably why the speaker run out. Yeah. There must be a timer or something on it. All resets.
Back up on this one. Oh, next.
Then you can still see and hear you guys online though, so you can continue.
All right, okay, I'm just gonna wrap up here real quick. I was gonna say, we track WUI over the past 30 years. The amount of development in the WUI in Arizona has more than doubled. There's a lot of development in the WUI area. Some communities, as you saw, Flagstaff, Prescott, almost the entirety of their community are within areas of what we call heightened fire risk. I will also mention as well that the data, and Wolfgang mentioned it, but I'll reiterate, the data that we got from the modeling, we sort of fact checked that against the experience that we have at DFFM and with our firefighters. Some of them have decades of firefighting experience, and they essentially said, yeah, there's fire risk there. So it's not just a blind model, it's based on experience as well. Lastly, I'll just mention that, again, it's a framework for gathering data that's going to allow the task force, policymakers, and insurers to have a conversation around a common data set. And that is what the whole idea behind identifying heightened fire risk areas in Arizona is all about. So With that, Lori, we're done.
All right, thank you so much. Sorry to cut you off.
No.
Are there any questions in the room for either Wolfgang or Director Torres? Any questions online from task force members? Paul?
Hi, Wolfgang and Director Torres. First of all, thank you, just at a local day job level for the gathering, synthesizing, and sharing of the data. It really helps us with our initial and extended attack locally. I just have one quick question. Going back to risk as determined by hazard times vulnerability, and we're saying that vulnerability is determined determined by exposure and susceptibility. Do we have any examples of those determinants that are used to qualify what exposure is?
Yeah, so Paul, this is Tom. So if I could, so the answer is yes, and it's defined in detail on the website. So if you go to wildfirerisk.org, there's a whole section on defining what those terms mean, how they're calculated, and there's peer-reviewed research behind it that gets into even more detail that you can really dive into.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Michael, I see your hand up. Remember to unmute.
We'll get the hang of this. Thank you very much. I just want to reflect back to make sure I understand. The statute that creates this task force and the data call created this new term, heightened fire risk areas. And so what you all did was figure out a methodology to set out what that is. And then you fact checked it against local expertise as well as the existing WUI maps. And you have confidence that this is largely indicative of the areas of quote unquote heightened fire risk. Is that correct?
Michael, I would say that that's generally correct, except for the WUI part. You know, it's not based on the WUI areas. We just sort of overlaid the results of our analysis on the existing areas of WUI that we are aware of in the state. So, you know, the actual analysis was based on the risk modeling as determined or as laid out by wildfirerisk.org in that methodology.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
otherwise, you said it well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from any members online?
Yes, this is Karen trying to figure out how to raise my hand, sorry. Is there any plan, you mentioned at the outset an example from Verisk. Are you potentially considering reaching out to any of the private modelers as just one more validation point versus simply relying on the public data sets and models?
One of the data elements that's included in the data call is to actually ask for the insurer's fire risk rating for that particular area or that residence, and to also ask specifically the type of model that they're using. And that can be, once we get that data, can be utilized to compare against what DFFM has developed, and that can be discussed in that regard.
Can you state your name? That way you know.
Tom Lubin, again with DIFI.
And keep in mind, Lori Munn, Karen too, that this is a 2-year. So this first year, you know, we'll kind of see what happens and then kind of adjust going into year 2.
No, that makes sense. Great, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none, we're going to keep moving on. We have another kind of a recap of the findings of the Resiliency and Mitigation Council presentation. As you all know, over the last year, we had meetings monthly, the council did, and it culminated in a report that was issued at the end of 2025. And Fausto, if you can give us that recap.
Thanks, Lori. This is Fausto Burrell with the Department of Insurance and Financial Institutions. So I'll try to run through this rather quickly since most of the members, or at least a good amount of the members on this task force, were also on the Resiliency Mitigation Council. As was explained at the beginning of the meeting, while the task force is now statutorily charged with making recommendations, the Department of Insurance and Financial Institutions set up the council more as an investigative body. With the council, we set out to understand what issues are exactly affecting the homeowners insurance market here in Arizona, and also ways to mitigate wildfire risks that potentially impacting those rates. So of course, this final report is available on DIFI's website. I have it linked down here. Moving into some of the findings from the council. So we're just going to kind of highlight the main findings from each section of that report. So first, really unsurprisingly, the homeowner insurance rates are increasing nationally, not just here in Arizona, but of course, more steeply within those forested or wildland urban interface areas of the state that are subject to that heightened fire risk due to many factors, including inflation, obviously wildfire risk, cost increases of reinsurance for insurance carriers, and other factors that are influencing that nationally. Arizona specifically, as multiple presentations pointed out, has experienced significant population growth within its WUI areas, including those areas that are at heightened fire risk or risk of structural loss due to wildfire. Some of which were just highlighted in DFFM's presentation. Many communities also in the state and nationally, but specifically within the forested and WUI areas of the state, are already engaging in mitigation efforts. Though for the most part, many of these efforts are rather voluntary, and so they can kind of lead to attrition or not continual upkeep of these mitigation efforts, as mitigation for wildfire is kind of an ongoing effort. As well as the insurance companies utilize a variety of modeling tools to quantify the risk of structural loss to fires. Some of those modeling tools that we started in presentations do involve factoring in mitigation efforts, either at the community level, such as efforts for the community to construction commissions, any type of wildfire mitigation itself, such as foresting, potentially, or even some of the parcel level mitigations, just depending on the model that is being used. The last two findings here overall in the report, and probably most importantly, this one here is that for homeowners insurance purposes, wildfire risk to communities is better characterized as a home ignition problem rather than a wildfire control problem. And the difference here, is really that wildfires will continue to happen in areas where wildfires can happen. But the big issue for insurers and therefore then homeowners is the risk for the home igniting, in a wildfire, rather than actually the risk of a wildfire going through a certain area. To that end, homeowners can directly reduce the risk of their home igniting if a wildfire were to go through their community, and of course the loss of the home through various home hardening measures. But that also includes community level action as well, which is important to help prevent spread of fire if one structure does ignite to adjacent structures. And then lastly, kind of all Western states within the country experience some wildfire risk to some degree to structures. Many of these Western states, some of which we brought in during the council, have created programs to address the availability of homeowners insurance in their state. Some of these programs include grant programs for retrofitting individual homes to new building codes or new building standards, types of residual market mechanisms. So the public most likely knows these as FAIR plans or similar type residual market mechanisms to make sure that insurance is available to individuals that potentially cannot find coverage within the admitted market. Updated billing codes, both at the local and potentially statewide level, depending on what state you're looking at, including incorporating WUI specific codes into building codes for new construction, as well as encouraging innovative insurance products, as Tom Zubin mentioned at the beginning of his presentation, that the Arizona fire policy is based on the New York Standard Fire Policy. And so one of the innovative options to kind of take a look, as well as some of the way that fire insurance has been historically set up, and to see if there's a need to kind of rethink of how fire insurance is provided and written. So that concludes my presentation, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Pasto. Are there any questions regarding the report or any of the findings from the council in the room? Any questions or comments from anyone online? Okay, seeing none, we are going to move into the part of the meeting for member discussion and remarks. Just remember, as we heard earlier, that those need to be limited to what was discussed or presented today. But is there any member remarks or discussion items that you want to bring forth to the room? I don't see any in the room. Michael, if you want to unmute yourself, you have the floor.
Thank you. I have a timing question. Data calls can take time, and we've also got a mitigation remit that you described. So how does this task force intend to kind of time things out over the course of this year and then over the course of 2 years?
So this is Tom. I'll provide my thoughts, and I would 100% agree with you, Michael. This needs to be discussed. I'm glad you brought it up. My thought is that there's going to be a timeline. We just sent out the data call and defined the areas of high fire was. But what are we going to do in the meantime? And we have a fair amount of information, as Fausto just talked about. And there's also information that we haven't talked about. And there are other Western states that are engaged in similar things that we could learn from as well. And so my thought is that this body begin, while we're waiting for the data call, to consider the information that we have in front of us right now and what we can obtain relatively easily, and think about the charge that we have to consider solutions and making recommendations. That's my thought. I think there's a sense of urgency, and I think we should, this body should engage in that work in the short term while we wait for the data.
Yeah, I strongly support that. I think I very much enjoyed working on the Resilience Mitigation Council with many of you, and we were limited that we were by statute not allowed to make recommendations, and that's a benefit of this task force. There are, I think, many policy approaches that are currently being tried in different states, both in the wildfire context or the resiliency context more generally. And I would welcome conversation while the data call collects its information so we can educate ourselves and begin to formulate policy recommendations grounded in science and best practices.
So Michael, as facilitator, I know with the council, I brought in numerous speakers each month, and we could start by circling back and hitting, some of those, like you said, new things that are coming out with the various states, or also dive a little deeper into building codes as possible presentations in our upcoming meeting. Just to throw out some ideas.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Appreciate you bringing the point up, Michael, and I agree with Director Torres about the approach and Lori.
As do I think.
Randy, remember to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, I support the thoughts there from Director Torres and Michael Newman. I'm fairly new to a thought process of the data call. I was just on the DIFI website working through and kind of reading about all the different data sets. It looks like it's due back by April 1st, which I think is fantastic. Just for perspective, what's the thoughts on how long it might take to kind of filter through that and get some recognizable data out of that data set?
So we have a due date of April 1st, but as with experience on data calls, we are anticipating maybe having some data come in later than the due date. That always happens. Hopefully, a best case scenario is we won't and things can progress, but we have to keep that in mind. So with that, also, we're working with NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, to help some of that data collection. So I know we've been in talks with them on timelines as well. And Tom, have you had any updates from them as far as the timelines?
Yeah, this is Tom, but not at this time. I think based on also the statute that the requirement is that we aggregate the data in a report to provide to the task force by December 31st. So I know that is maybe later in the year than one would want to get sooner information, but we'll try to strive to provide as much as we can prior to that, but we are shooting for the requirements within the statute.
This is Buzz. I just want to point out that our report is due by December 31st, so we should definitely have the data to the task force before then.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Randy?
Yes, it does. And thank you for that. It makes a lot of sense. And it's a lot of data to try to gather and kind of work through. And so with that, I'll just, again, support the comment. I think there's a lot of things this group can take action on. And I support getting into those conversations sooner than later.
And Randy and other committee members, if you have specific ideas that you'd like to throw out, we'd love to hear them.
Absolutely.
Any other, Karen?
Yeah, I'll just echo the same. We, as a trade association, as I mentioned, are working on wildfire issues across a number of Western states and have some really strong ideas. Appreciate the data-driven approach on the data call, and definitely will look forward to when those results are available. As far as relaying policy ideas, how would you like us to relay it? Is that just by email, a specific contact for email?
Yeah, that would be great. And actually, under the next steps after we were done with discussion, I was going to outline how you all can submit ideas or discussion items for the next meeting and when that might be.
Great.
Is there another hand on there, Fasto? Or
No one.
no one? Any other comments in the row? Okay, with that, do we have any people online? Because there's no one in the row. So, okay, so we can go ahead and bypass the public comment section and move into closing remarks and next meeting information. So by law, the task force must meet at least 4 times per year. The next meeting date are determined by the chair and the co-chair. We had discussions prior to the meeting today, and based on timelines, and we were thinking end of April, early May, if that works out for the members, that some type time, maybe that last week in April or first week in May. We just wanted to throw that out, and if Thursdays are good, we could either pick that last Thursday in April or the first Thursday in May. Just wanted to see if there were any conflicts. It's unlike the council where we were able to establish this meeting time, this is a little different. Yes, Michael?
The last Thursday in April, IBHS has its Board of Directors meeting, so I will be otherwise committed that day.
Would that first week in May, the first Thursday in May work?
That'd be fine.
Okay, so why don't we, if there's no objections, tentatively set it for that, or I don't know offhand what that is, but the first Thursday in May. 7? Okay, so May 7th, same time, 1 to 3 Arizona time. Which I'm not sure what time zone we'll be on. I guess daylight savings is in this, I guess. So we'll be back to Pacific time. Mountain time, whatever they call us. Yes.
So Lori, a question, given the fact that we just had that conversation about wanting to respond with a sense of urgency and, maybe make some policy decisions on, or not decisions, recommendations on what we've learned in the past. If we start getting enough information from the task force members, do we have the ability to say, hey, it might be more timely to have a meeting, not wait until May, let's do it in March. And so I think, Mr. Chair, we have that ability to have that flexibility. I'm thinking we're going to maybe get some of that information, and it may be more timely to meet sooner than the end of May or May 7 or whatever that date is. Is that a possibility? I'm assuming it is. But
Yeah, I just was, meeting at least 4 times per year. I guess that's the minimum. So I think we're good if we need to move it up and you all wanted to move it up and have one in March.
And I like your sense of urgency. Thank you.
And again, I would look at probably trying to keep Thursdays. Did you have a time frame in March? I know NAIC is in March, so it is a busy month for regulators, staff, and industry folks. So I would, that is kind of right in the middle of March.
I would say we just maintain flexibility on that idea, and as enough information comes in, it's the will of the chair and myself, and we make that decision, and then we'll find a date. That's my thought.
And I'll just echo, yeah, we on the insurance trade side, we've got state legislative sessions that are very, very active in the